watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
And welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael. On a Wednesday evening, we're doing basically a Ask Me Anything kind of thing. Put your questions there in the chat section, and I'll do my best to answer them. Again, make sure to put them to @Reason and Theology so I can differentiate them from comments. While I am waiting for y'all to put them in the chat section, we're going to have a brief word from our sponsor, the Saint Maker.
Can a personal planner really make you a saint? The truth is, many of us spend our lives running from distraction to distraction. And even for dedicated Catholics, our quest for sainthood often takes a back seat. The Saint Maker is the first high-performance planner for the spiritual life made by faithful Catholics for faithful Catholics. Combining the practices of Catholic faithful throughout time with the science of personal productivity, the Saint Maker will help you grow in virtue and structure your spiritual life while getting organized and achieving ambitious goals. And that can help you become a saint. The Saint Maker is a beautiful, easy to carry, and well-crafted companion to your Missal, Bible, and Rosary. Published 4 times per year, each season includes daily planning pages, feast days, and devotions for both forms of the liturgical calendar, goal-setting pages, confession journals, and much more. There are lots of great Catholics using the Saint Maker, like Scott Williams, CEO of Sock Religious, best-selling author Sam Guzman, YouTubers like Dina Barca and Amber Schneider, and priests like Father Dean Marshall and Father Corey Stika. Try the Saint Maker out, and if you decide that it's not for you, you can send it back for a full refund within 90 days. Visit thesaintmaker.com to shop the planners. Quantities are limited, so head over to thesaintmaker.com to order yours and start your Saint Maker journey today.
So this is a great question here from Tom. I have a question. Who did Adam and Eve's children marry? I'm in a debate with a friend of mine, and I don't have the answer. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you, and to you as well. There's multiple ways in which this can be answered, and so there are actually multiple options here. Number one is that Adam and Eve are historical figures, and that their children married other children of theirs who are not recorded in Scripture. And at this time, this would not have been immoral, but the prohibition against incest came later on. Then there are other options, which would say that, okay, Adam and Eve aren't 2 individuals, but the truth of the story is there. It's just that it represents a group of people. So there's that option as well. I favor the former, but I'm open to other possibilities if science were to show that the former position is excluded. All truth is God's truth. So there's nothing that science would be able to demonstrate that would be at odds with divine revelation. The question, however, is what exactly has science been able to demonstrate? That much is kind of what is left for debate. Okay, another question here. How does God knowing what will occur not make him the decider of a sort, or a sort of decider of the future? And how do miracles and divine revelation fit into that? Also a really, really heavy hitter question here. Some might take a Molinist perspective, which would be that God, basically sees what people would choose. And he sees also all the different scenarios of what people would choose in different multiverses, if you will. And he decides to actuate one of them that brings about the greatest good. But that these are choices that are made freely by people. He merely actuates that timeline, if you will. So simply knowing what they're going to decide doesn't mean that he is the one making them decide in that case. Others might take a perspective that says, okay, well, it's not that God just sees what people would do, but God has decreed what will be done, but in such a way that he is not responsible for the evil, but is responsible for the good. How that can be reconciled is a very difficult question. I've had individuals like Dr. R.J. Matava and others on the show who have spoken about this and tried to reconcile that. I'll let y'all decide whether or not it has been reconciled, but those are definitely some shows to check out for that perspective. But the idea that God maybe doesn't know what people will choose is excluded. God clearly does know the future, but how does that work with people's free choice? Even with a more sovereign understanding and approach, a person would still say that when a person chooses, they choose freely. Perhaps as secondary agents, secondary causes, but they still choose freely. But again, how does that reconcile with God not being responsible for evil acts? Again, I refer you to those shows for a more detailed discussion. Yeah, another good one. Wow, y'all are coming with some really good ones today. Y'all gonna make me work. Good one. I was wondering on your thoughts of the Orthodox mindset or the phronema. What would they refer to, or what they would refer to as phronema? Mm-hmm. There's some truth to it. We could speak about the mind of the church. In some of the liturgical services, it references the mind of the church. So I don't have a problem with the concept per se. But I suppose where I do have a problem is when this concept of a phronema contradicts the teaching authority of the church. Those two are never at odds. So you can't have somebody say, well, I'm going with the mind of the church, but I maintain X, and X is against what has been taught definitively by the church. Okay, well, at that point, no, you're not in accord with the mind of the church. So those are my brief thoughts on it. If you had any follow-up questions, let me know. Maybe I can get more specific. Yeah, how preterist is the church's view on the end times? What are your personal thoughts on it? Look, I can see somebody defending kind of a partial preterist perspective, not full-blown preterism. I don't see that at all. I don't know who maintains full-blown preterism. Are there any such people out there, really? Even after 1st and 2nd Thessalonians? That's weird. Clearly, there are some things that haven't happened yet, right? The general resurrection, the second coming. And those things are described in the book of Revelation. So I don't think that you could have like a full-blown preterist view of the book of Revelation, because you would have to say the general resurrection and second coming have already happened, which is an untenable position. But I can see somebody saying a partial preterist perspective. Maybe some of the aspects of the book of Revelation have been fulfilled historically. And there has to be some truth to that. I mean, when it comes to these eschatological texts, they had to have meant something to their original audience. Otherwise, why write it to these churches if it has nothing to do with them, but with people 2,000-3,000 years later? There had to be some kind of immediate fulfillment of some of these things, especially in the book of Revelation. But does that mean everything had an immediate fulfillment? No. But I do think a lot of things did. But just because something has an immediate fulfillment doesn't mean it won't be fulfilled again in a greater way, in a fuller way. Some of the prophecies that speak of Christ, of Jesus, and his first coming had an immediate fulfillment in the days of its hearers. But then it also has a fuller fulfillment in Christ, so that we're able to say, yes, the prophecy about being born of a virgin, that has an immediate fulfillment that did not apply to Christ. But then it also has a greater fulfillment that does apply to Christ. That's often how prophecy works. It has this kind of double component to it. So that's how I would understand maybe more of a partial preterist perspective. How much of it? I mean, boy, we'd have to start going through a lot of texts from Daniel and the book of Revelation to really start to determine how much. But I would say that it's possible to maintain the idea that some of the aspects have happened. Some of the aspects of the book of Revelation have happened, but just because those things have had an immediate fulfillment doesn't mean that they won't have a future and greater and fuller fulfillment. Okay. What is this? Does a teaching addressed to a group of cardinals carry more weight than a teaching addressed to the whole world? Man, good question. I love these. These first 4 questions are really, really good ones. 4 or 5? How many is that? I think that was the 5th question. Man, really good stuff. Okay. Well, all right. So we're just talking about an address, right? We're not talking about any document, right? We're just talking about, the Pope giving an address to a group of cardinals. And then I suppose, are we comparing that to an address to the whole world, or is this a document to the whole world? Because there's going to be some differences there. Because if we're talking a document, those 2 can vary in authority. But if we're just talking about an address, okay, well, addressing a group of cardinals is going to, with all other things being equal, an address to a group of cardinals is going to carry less weight than an address to the whole world. But notice I said all other things being equal. Excuse me. We can have some things that might factor in that would throw that off. What if you have a pope who is addressing the whole world, but doesn't really use forceful language in his teaching? But then he addresses a group of cardinals and uses extremely forceful words and even says, I teach with the authority of St. Peter, definitively X. Are you going to tell me that carries less weight than the one to the whole world? No, that proposition, whatever X he just said is going to carry more proposition, even though the target audience is lower. So that's why I said all other things being equal. If we're just talking about a scenario between a group of cardinals versus the whole world, yeah, the whole world will carry more authority. But usually when he addresses the whole world, it's more in the form of a document. I'm not saying that he never addresses the whole world in an address that's not like a document in advance, but usually he will do an encyclical or something like that, addressed to all the churches and the whole world, and everyone of goodwill or something like that. Excellent question. How is loving God truly possible? If I know that I don't love him, he'll throw me in hell. Man, y'all are just heavy hitters today. All of y'all. Wow, this is incredible. Yeah. How is loving God truly possible? If I know that I don't love him, he'll throw me into hell. I would challenge the way that this is phrased. If you don't love God, it's not so much that God throws you in hell, it's that you separate yourself from God. God is always open to you. God is always open to a relationship with you. It's just that you might not be open to a relationship with him. And so if you don't love him, then it's actually not God who's throwing you in hell. It's you who is turning your back on God. So I would rephrase that. Number 2, I'm not so sure that it's the case that you don't love God. I'm not so sure. I'm not convinced. You know why? You know what love is. I mean, you asked me in the question about love, which tells me you know what love is. And I'm sure, I don't know you from Adam, but I'm sure you have loved a person before, whether it's a family member or spouse or somebody like that, a child. You've loved somebody in some way, some form of love. I guarantee it. I'll bet my life on it. Okay. What you loved in that person is some good that you saw in them. That good that you saw in them ultimately comes from God, who is the source of all goodness. So what you loved in them, and maybe still love in them, is actually a reflection of what you love in God. But God is so much greater. It is such a higher capacity. But you love him so much more. So it's actually not necessarily the case that you don't love God. I actually think that you do. You just might not be aware that what you're loving in other people, the goodness that you see in them, is actually from God. Excellent, excellent question. I hear my son banging on the door. Let me go tend to him real quick. Hey, RNT fans, I'm really excited to say that Father Daniel Dozier and I will be leading a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in 2023, April 19th to the 29th, and it's going to be Byzantine style, so you're going to get a Byzantine tour of the Holy Land. If you're interested in this, be sure to check out reasonandtheology.com/Holy Land for more information. And by the way, I also recently learned that Israel is no longer requiring a person to be vaccinated in order to be admitted into the country. So more good news. Once again, check out reasonandtheology.com/Holy Land for more information. Fun stuff. All right. Well, back to your question. If you love something in someone, it's ultimately a reflection of who God is. If you think you don't love God, it's because you don't know who God is. You don't actually understand who God is. God is ultimate beauty, ultimate goodness, ultimate truth. You can't tell me you don't love those things. Of course you do. You love beauty. We all love beauty. We when we see something beautiful, we can't take our eyes off it. We're captivated with it. That's a reflection, a poor reflection of God's beauty. You do love God. You might not necessarily understand who he is. So I think that when we understand who God is, we do love him. And it's not that he throws us in hell if we don't love him, if we choose to rebel against him. It's that we turn our backs on him. Let's see. How can a timeless God wait for things to happen to intervene in the world? Also, just letting you know, I used and sourced one of your arguments in my book, Catholic God, True God. I'll need to check that out. Catholic God, True God. Okay, well, how can a timeless God wait for things to happen to intervene in the world? This is very similar to the issue that we have with the essence and energies distinction versus divine simplicity as understood by Aquinas. This is very much related to it, because some people are going to ask, okay, well, how can God, who's a timeless being, interact in time? It's similar to what you're saying. A Palamite might speak of a way in which God can interact in time with uncreated energies, but that's distinct from his essence. This is a difficult one because in my mind, I'm still working through this. I'm not so sure that the Palamite position necessarily solves it to the exclusion of Aquinas's understanding. How can a timeless God wait for things to happen to intervene in the world? I know that God, who is timeless and who is all-powerful, is able to interact with his creation, but I honestly am not sure that I can give you a satisfactory answer, and I'm not sure anybody else can. Maybe others can. Maybe others can. And maybe perhaps the Palamite understanding is sufficient. Maybe the Thomist perspective is sufficient. I don't know. But in my opinion, I don't think that there really is an answer that could ever be given that will fully satisfy our questions here. In the same way as we saw earlier with the predestination and free will tension, I do think that they can be resolved. Will that be done on this side of the veil to the best of our satisfaction? I'm not so sure. I really am not. And I'm okay with that. I mean, I've finally come to the point that it's like, I'm okay with that. There was a point in time where that wasn't, and it's like, I want answers, but you know what? The older you get, you're kind of like, well, okay. I've seen the deficiencies of my intellect enough over the years to realize that I'm still going to have deficiencies at the end of the day, no matter what. So I probably won't be able to understand God's reconciliation of these two things. I don't think that they're contradictory. That would pose a problem for me. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. That would pose something that I would have to continue to pursue. But from what I've seen, they're not mutually exclusive. So I can't give you a sufficient answer, to be honest with you. I can point you in the direction of some of the conversations that we've had about Thomism and Palamism and some of the debates and discussions there. It's touched on. I don't think it will be to anyone's satisfaction ultimately. Yeah, so how would you argue for the papacy against the Oriental Orthodox? Though their perspective is going to be a little different than the Byzantine Orthodox because of the fact that they rejected the Byzantine Empire, right, and its position. It will be distinct. And we might not necessarily then be able to appeal to some of the same ecumenical councils as we would with the Orthodox. We could appeal to Ephesus. They have accepted Ephesus, and there's some stuff in there about the papacy by Philip the Legate that I think is incompatible with their ecclesiology. But on the whole, I would still say that the answer here is going to be, on the whole, the same arguments for the papacy are going to apply with the Oriental Orthodox. The attestation, biblical and historical attestation to the papacy prior to the separation with the Oriental Orthodox. I think that is enough to refute their perspective of ecclesiology. So same arguments that I would use against the Eastern Orthodox, with those exceptions that I mentioned. Thank you, Mahovel, for the super chat there. What's up with the tie and outfit in general? Is that a question or is that just a comment? I guess that's a question. What's up with a tie and outfit in general? Man, you gotta look good. You gotta step it up. Dapper, what was it? Who's the guy? Dapper Dan. You gotta step your clothing game up. Well, I feel like often I'm very sloppy in a hoodie and stuff like that. So it's good to have a better appearance when possible. I do see a couple super chats. Let me grab those. By the way, would dormition of Mary be eligible to be a primary object? Wasn't it? Oh, no. You mean just the dormition, not the ascension. You mean just the dormition. If it ever does become a primary object, because it's not an object of infallibility at all, primary or secondary at the moment. But if it does ever become an object of infallibility, I think that I could argue it implicitly from Scripture by way of typology. But could I argue that from Scripture outside of typology? Probably not. And therefore, it would either need to be a secondary object in that case or primary object by way of typology. Can a doctrine be defined definitively? It's kind of redundant, but defined definitively but not infallibly, no. Not if you believe in the indefectibility of the church, no. If you believe that the church can bind definitively a person's conscience to error, then yes, but now you've said that the church is defectible. So most aren't going to take that position. So no, if it's definitive, it's infallible. I saw a couple super chats. Let me grab those real quick before I go on to any of the others. The book is not available to the public yet, Parker Manning says. It will be made available soon. Awesome. Well, I look forward to checking it out. The book is not available to public. Will be in a couple of months. It's the Chris Date argument. I take it and expand it for about 20 pages. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. So I look forward to that coming out. And thank you for the soup chats, by the way. God sets two paths before us, one leading to life and one leading to death. You've either been reading the book of Deuteronomy lately or the Didache, one of the two. And yes, I agree with you. Let's see. Oh, I think there's another super chat. Let me grab that one. Scrolling down here. And again, thank you, Mahovo, for that super sticker. Have you heard the argument that obsequium, religious religiosum, means which means assent of intellect and will in Latin, for those of y'all who are not familiar. Obsequium, religious geosum. I never use the Latin term for that reason. It's just a tongue twister for me. I always just use the English term. Means you can't dissent from the church teachings as long as you've charitably wrestled with it, but still can't accept the teaching. For example, same-sex marriage. Okay. Well, actually, we have multiple things going on here. Okay, so what you're talking about here with the term that Vatican II uses, because Vatican II in Lumen Gentium is the one that uses this term. It's not exclusive to Vatican II. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it might be the first time that term is used in a magisterial document, paragraph 25. I think that might be the first time. And there's a whole lot of debate among theologians on what the term means. You can see Father Sullivan discussing it, Dr. Joy, all of the household names when it comes to magisterial studies. They all discuss this this term. John Boyle, I think, also discusses it in his book. From what I can gather, the term itself, religious submission of intellect and will, is not just this silent, pious silence. I disagree with the church, but I'm not going to express it. It's not just that. It's I'm going to conform my intellect willfully to this teaching. That's how I would explain it. Obsequium religiosum. That's how I understand the term. If you've seen a better definition, I'd love to see it. But to me, that's the most consistent. Now, then you ask, okay, now that we've defined our terms, okay, does that mean you can dissent from church teaching as long as you've charitably wrestled with it? Donum Veritatis says that in particular cases, a theologian who has done due diligence and is incredibly informed about the matters, but still wrestles in their conscience with a teaching can withhold assent of intellect and will. But that is in the context of non-definitive teachings. You asked about same-sex marriage. Well, the issue concerning same-sex marriage is not an issue of non-definitive teachings. I think that the immorality of same-sex unions and therefore same-sex marriage and the limit of marriage between one man and one woman, I think that that's definitive. I don't believe that it is I don't think that it's what's the word I'm looking for? Defined dogma. But I do think it's an undefined dogma. It's dogma. It is part of divine revelation, and it's confirmed by the church, but in a way that's not solemnly confirmed. It's confirmed by the ordinary and universal magisterium, the constant teaching of the bishops throughout the ages, as something that's divinely revealed. So I would say it's an undefined dogma that's therefore irreformable. One cannot use this religious submission of intellect and will concept to and a dispensation from it to apply in this case. That is only in the case of non-definitive teachings, and I don't think it can be argued this is a non-definitive teaching. Really good question, Jess. I appreciate that. And thank you for using the Latin term that I fumble over a million times, which is why I never use it. Let's see here. What else we got? Does the Pope have the power to appoint and depose rulers? For example, was making the English king the Lord of Ireland just the Pope playing politics? Could Pope Francis remove Biden? Yeah. You know, this is a debate that goes back really, really far in history, right? The spiritual authority does have superiority over the temporal authority, but does that necessarily mean that he can appoint whoever he wants in whatever governmental system there is? In a Christian nation, a Catholic nation, I think that he has that authority. In a non-Christian nation, does he have that authority? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. And even if he did, I don't think a non-Christian nation would listen to him anyway. So that's kind of where the debate is in my mind. If you have something definitive either way, I'd love to see it. Yeah, so can you explain the difference between Catholic and Lutheran Eucharistic sacrament? There's different ways in which I've seen Lutherans explain their position. Some don't really like the term consubstantiation, but they would still effectively, from what I've seen on the whole, maintain a position that Christ is really present there, but not in the sense of transubstantiation, right? That the substance is different, but the accidents remain the same. The best that I've heard it described is Christ is around the Eucharistic species, but I'm sure that that's not going to be the satisfaction of some Lutherans. I imagine they'll want to explain it more nuanced than that, and that's fine. I welcome that. I'm not saying that that's the best way to express the Lutheran perspective, if there's really even one perspective, but that's the way I've heard it articulated. If there are any knowledgeable Lutherans that are concerned with that definition that I gave, please correct me. I would love to hear more. But the difference in that case, if that's a proper definition of the Lutheran perspective, the difference here is that the species itself its substance isn't changed. Whereas we would say the substance of the species actually does change, the Eucharistic species. Okay, what else? Who's ready for Friday's takedown? Yeah. We're going to have a live stream. I'll be out of town, so I won't be on it, but we'll have a live stream here in RNT with a mystery guest, a mystery host. In fact, 3 mystery hosts who are going to fill in and do a live stream consecration party. Who's ready for it? I am. I wish I could be on the stream, though. I might make a cameo appearance on my cell phone or something. We'll see. Any thoughts on Taylor Marshall's videos? I haven't really watched, but a couple clips. I haven't really watched it in, the videos at length. I don't really watch his material that much. I see stuff come up in my social media, and I'll usually catch a minute or two of a highlight clip or something like that. but that's about it. I don't want to speculate as far as what his position is, but I just kind of got the impression that he's skeptical if it's going to be validly done. That was the impression that I got. But correct me if I'm wrong. So Coffee and David, for example, in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, it's God's word paired with the bread and wine that brings the reality of Christ's presence. Right. It's around. That's the way I've heard it described. But again, some Lutherans might, Dr. Cooper or somebody might take issue with the phrasing of that. And okay, that's fine. If there's a better concept or better articulation, I'm more than happy to hear it. I see another super chat here. But let me grab this. Why do some people say God didn't want people marrying outside their race in the Old Testament? The reason why he did not have interracial marriage in the Old Testament, as a general principle, it wasn't always strictly forbidden. In the case of Moses, for example, it wasn't really about race. Like you technically, he did not forbid interracial marriage. He forbade international marriage. It was more of a, not you can't marry this race. It was more you can't marry a person from a different religion and nation, because the nation was going to be tied to a different religion. So it wasn't about skin color or race or something like that. It was about, don't marry somebody who is of a different faith, because that person is going to lead you astray. And that principle still applies in the Catholic Church today as a general rule. Now, obviously, it can be relaxed to marry a non-Catholic or even a non-Christian. But as a general rule, that rule still stands, because you marry a non-Christian, there's going to be problems there. And sometimes we're going to be tempted to follow their religion. So that's what it was. It wasn't really about race as much as it was about interreligious marriage, I guess we can put it that way. Thank you, Canadian Catholic. Are early Pontifical Biblical Commission proclamations binding because they contradict the current view of PBC and Catholic scholars? To my recollection, very, very early biblical or PBC documents were part of the papal magisterial. They're an arm of the papal magisterium. So they had ordinary, let me rather, instead of using that term, non-definitive yet authoritative magisterial status. That was revoked. I forget in what year it was revoked. Though the other problem here, and you can see Ratzinger talking about it, it seems that some of these things have been reversed. Some would argue that the decisions of the PBC, some of them have been reversed. If they're right about reversals, that's possible, because we're talking about a reversal of a non-definitive authoritative teaching, which is possible if it's non-definitive by definition. Is there, however, a way to reconcile PBC with some of the things that we see in the post-conciliar era? Possibly. So I'm not necessarily conceding that this is a full-blown magisterial reversal. But your question is, are they still binding? They would be binding insofar as they're still authoritative. But then the question is, are they still authoritative? Have they been reversed? And are they even at odds with something else? Those are still some remaining questions I would like to see addressed. I've been meaning to get further into that one. Has there been a reversal there? But it's a little bit outside of the scope of what I'm currently working on when it comes to magisterial reversals. So I haven't really haven't dived into that one just yet, but I do intend to get to that among some others, but it'll be some time. So, would I host a debate between a young earth creationist and a theistic evolutionist? Of course. Give me some names. Send me some names. Why are we promoting Fatima? Is anything more than a private devotion? Why can't we be clear that belief in Fatima is optional and not binding? Thank you for the super chat again. Okay, well, this is actually a topic of something that I was going to be addressing further. So stay tuned for more, but I will give you a general answer, especially because it's a super chat. So I want to give you something now. Okay. I don't think that the private versus public revelation distinction is sufficient here. If we're going to just use this one or the other, private versus public distinction, yes, we would say it's private. It's not public insofar as it's something delivered by God to the apostles as part of the deposit of faith. It's not public in that sense. So if all we're limited to is that and private, okay, yeah, it's private. But does private really capture the status of Fatima today? That's what I want to say. No, I want to say that that's an inadequate dichotomy. It doesn't account for further distinctions that need to be made. Because clearly, Fatima is in a different category than a private revelation that God might deliver to one person, right? God comes and gives a private revelation to one person. Compare that now to Fatima, which was before many people and has entered into our liturgy, the Roman liturgy at least, as a feast day. That's not the same as God simply coming to someone in their bedroom and telling them a message. That you can't flatten those into the same category. I'm sorry. That's not sufficient. We need a better distinction here than just private versus public. It's not good enough. Just like the ordinary versus extraordinary distinction in the magisterium, not good enough. There's more distinctions involved. Not good enough. What kind of assent is required to a revelation, a private revelation that has entered into our liturgy? Is not the liturgy a locus of tradition? And if it is, how does it inform our faith? And how do private revelations that enter into this locus inform our faith and inform our understanding of sacred tradition? We're not saying it's part of sacred tradition, but surely it informs our understanding of sacred tradition. Are we then free to just ignore it? I'm not so sure. I could see somebody saying I'm free to ignore a private revelation that God gives to Joe Schmo in their living room. I could see that. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that happened in front of a lot of people and has now entered into our liturgical calendar. That's going to require some kind of assent, in my estimation. Some kind of what I call liturgical assent, perhaps. I'm not saying it requires the assent of faith. Obviously, it doesn't. Clearly, it can't require the assent of faith. But with it being in the liturgy, does it require zero assent? I don't see that, unless we think that our liturgy is meaningless and doesn't require any assent on our part. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So I'll be working further on this issue of what kind of assent is required. But sneak peek, I want to say a liturgical assent is required. But I want to say that liturgical assent is required is to the general message, not to every word. To the general message, repentance and faith. Not literally every single word spoken to Lucy. It's to the overall tone and the overall message. People of the Old Testament times probably didn't have the same concept of race as we do today. Maybe not, but it definitely wasn't the case that he was forbidding interracial marriage per se. That's most certainly not the case. Moses had a wife that seemed to be, I think she was described as with dark skin, in contrast to him. Sean Matthews, so do we consider the Orthodox churches today as schismatic? Why didn't we allow them to receive free communion in the Catholic Church? Good question. Okay, well, where do we begin? I'll try to not give you a 2-hour answer here on this one. I'll try to summarize it in 2 minutes. Are the Eastern Orthodox schismatic? Materially, yes. Formally, the vast majority, no. Materially, they are separated from the Roman pontiff. So at the very least, materially, they're in schism. The vast majority of Orthodox, however, do not add form to that schism. They do not formalize it in their hearts. And therefore, they are not formal schismatics, and therefore, they are not culpable for the material state that they're in because of their bishops and their forefathers. And I'm not saying every bishop is a formal schismatic either. So that deals with the first part. Yes and no. Material, yes. Formal, in the vast majority of cases, I would say no. Why then do we allow them to receive communion in the Catholic churches? Well, we allow them as long as it doesn't cause scandal. There is that caveat. But, and I think it's a good thing that we allow them. I wish it were reciprocated. In many cases, it's not. In some cases, it is, but not formally and officially on their part. Why do we? We recognize that they have valid sacraments, valid local churches, and we recognize that the majority of them are not formalizing schism and they're not formalizing heresy. Therefore, they're not putting a barrier between themselves and God. So they would be in a state of grace. They would be, objectively speaking, in a state that is able to receive communion. Although objectively they're in a state of material schism, that's not going to introduce the element of sin and an impediment and a barrier between them and God subjectively. It might be an impediment objectively, materially, but personally, subjectively, most of them have not formalized the schism in their heart. If they have formalized the schism in their heart, they should not receive Holy Communion. But if they have not, then they should, because we recognize they have valid sacraments and they have valid local churches, and therefore they're in a state that is able to receive the Holy Eucharist. And this is not just an issue today. I have done some videos on communicatio and sacris in the past. I recommend you check those out. It's not just today. Today, the difference today is it's a policy today. Whereas in the past, it wasn't a policy, but it was more kind of an informal thing that we all knew was taking place. And, it was like, okay, in these cases, in these exceptional cases, it's okay. Okay, let's see. What else? Looking through the chat. Why does the Pope appoint all bishops? I don't think he should. I think that we should return to an older discipline where he doesn't. But I think that one of the reasons why this has happened is because of the Reformation. Things became much more centralized, although not immediately after the Reformation, because this idea of being centralized was really more in the last few hundred years. But I think it is related to it. But I'm not in favor of it. I don't think that it should be that centralized. No question. Just wanted to let you know you had a bigger impact on my faith than you'll ever know. I appreciate that. That's from an anonymous person. Thank you so much. That's very encouraging. Sometimes it's discouraging doing YouTube videos. for various reasons, but when I hear the feedback from people like yourself, that's encouraging. And I do get that feedback from people via email and, messages on Facebook or Twitter. I appreciate those so much. That really gives me fuel to continue to, provide content, especially content for free. Now, I do have content that's, for patrons only, and but I want to provide plenty that is for free, that's accessible to everyone because of reasons like this, because I know that it's helping people. At the same time, I do want to also offer extra stuff to people who are supporting me financially. So I want to have a good balance between the two. But yeah, thank you so much. That's really encouraging. When will there be more debates on my channel? Yeah, I've been wanting to do that. It's just kind of getting topics, names, people, stuff like that. That's kind of the thing. But if you have some names and topics, email them to me. Thank you for the super chat, Sean. If a non-definitive authoritative teaching isn't repeated by the magisterium for 500 years, could it naturally lose weight, and how much force it has? Okay, so just because it's not repeated, I argue, doesn't mean it decreases in weight. I won't say it decreases, although some, I think like Sullivan probably would have argued that based on some of the things I've read him say. I don't want to misrepresent him though. But that's kind of the impression I get, and I don't agree with that. Just because it's not repeated doesn't mean it's less authoritative. However, the fact that it is not repeated, I don't want to say decreases the weight, but it should show us how low the weight was originally when it was delivered, right? I don't think that retrospectively the weight decreases, but what it does do is, in hindsight, it shows us that this was low on the magisterium totem pole. So reception plays a role in how we understand the authoritativeness of a teaching, but I don't think that it decreases weight. Wonderful question. Thank you, Canadian Catholic, for the super chat. With Russia not recognizing Constantinople, how is that schism any better for Eastern Orthodox than their schism with Rome? Yeah, I think that it's just as significant. Now, they would say, well, it's not as bad because at least, Constantinople or Russia doesn't believe this or that papist heresy. But then again, Russia is accusing Constantinople of papism. So, but at least Constantinople doesn't affirm the filioque or something like that, maybe. So I don't know how much it is any better, but some might offer that as a distinction. Well, at least we still maintain the same faith. Do they? Do they maintain the same faith? They're accusing Constantinople of papism. That's not the same faith. Thank you for all you do. I'll be joining the church through a Ruthenian Byzantine church April 9th. Pray for me, and your videos have helped me understand the Eastern Rite. Thank you. I appreciate hearing that, Ben. It's really encouraging, and good luck with you on that. We're part of the same little tiny church now, as Dr. Meinert puts it. Yeah, that's really encouraging. April 9th. Well, that's right around the corner. Wow. Well, congrats on that. And I'm glad that this has helped. What's the status of the old Catholic Church with the Union of Utrecht? I thought that they still had valid succession, but then didn't they enter into communion with the Anglicans? So we might have to then question whether or not the form of ordination has been kept since then. I think what the Canadian Catholic was asking is, do we as Catholics have to believe in the apparition of Fatima in order to be Catholic? Well, that's what I was answering. What kind of assent is required whenever something enters into our liturgy? That's exactly what I was answering. Kimberly Hall says, I agree with Anonymous. You have helped me so much work through tough issues. I appreciate that. Thank you. Again, it's very encouraging to hear that. It really is. How would you respond to the Orthodox who claim that they have their original phronema? Also, I've seen that state that they don't care about our position due to different phronema. How would I differentiate them from a Gnostic then? A Gnostic can say the same thing. We have the true mind of Christ. Christ really told us this and taught us this. We truly understand Christ. Anybody can say that. A Mormon can say that. A Protestant can say that. Anyone can say that. You're going to have to do better than just say, I have the original phronema. That's what the Gnostics were saying. That the way that Irenaeus refuted the Gnostics is he appealed to the magisterium and apostolic succession, the teaching authority of the church in apostolic succession. So that's not good enough. We have apostolic succession too. And we actually have an objective magisterium that can settle theological disputes. The Orthodox don't. So I'm not buying that one. It's arguments like that that make me lose. I don't want to say lose respect, because no, I have a great deal of respect for the Orthodox members, but it makes me lose confidence in the Orthodox perspective. It really makes me think less of the perspective, not the people, but the perspective. It just seems like such a bad argument. What is my take on internet Melkites who seem to hate Rome with a passion and consistently deny any dogmas proclaimed past 1054? I would say that they, number one, often don't know history when it comes to the papacy. They don't know what they're talking about. So they're often mistaken about the papacy. Moreover, they don't understand their own canon law. The Eastern Code of Canon Law requires the same level of assent to magisterial propositions for Eastern Catholics as it does for Latin Rite Catholics. It's copy and paste from the Latin Rite Canon Law book. It's copy and paste. It's the same level of assent. You know why? Because it comes from the concluding paragraphs of the Profession of Faith by John Paul II. It's just copy and paste. Boom. That's for Latin Rite Catholics. That's for Eastern Rite Catholics. Whenever they say things like that, they're misinformed historically and misinformed about their own church and the assent that is required on their part. And I think that they're doing damage to the church. It's probably motivated by good motives to bring about greater unity with the Orthodox. And hey, I love that. But it's bringing about greater unity at the expense of further division with fellow Catholics, and at the expense of one entering into dissent from the teaching authority of the church. So it's their intentions often are well. The approach that they adopt is more problematic than the problem they're trying to solve to begin with. Sean Matthew, not to get you in trouble with all the Thomists in the chat, but why do you lean a bit more towards Palamism? Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that like maybe a reformed Thomist perspective just wouldn't work at all. I guess the essence and energies distinction seems to make a little bit more sense than the virtual distinction, but I'm not an expert in either, so I could totally be wrong on that. I'm just saying, based on my current understanding, it seems like there's a little bit more merit to the essence and energies distinction, but not by a whole lot, you know. And I'm not dogmatic about it. So that's why it seems to make a little bit more sense to me. And I seem to see a little bit more patristic support for it. But then again, I could also see how some people could read some things in the Fathers that would seem like a virtual distinction, right? So I hope that helps a little bit. What else we got? Still looking through the chat. How's the dissertation going? Good. So my proposal was accepted. And so now it's writing time. So in fact, I was writing on it earlier, just starting the main part. In a way, it's like the proposal part was harder than the dissertation itself probably is going to be. Now that I got a proposal and it has been approved, I think it's going to be easier. Might take me a year or so, but I think it's going to be easier, smooth sailing from here. Once I get a game plan, I'm kind of, I'm pretty productive. But it's like until you have that game plan, it's a little hard to move forward. So I'm going to be doing that over the next year or so. So you can look forward to that. So I'll talk about some of it on the show, I'm sure. As someone who is scrupulous, would you recommend that I follow my spiritual director who is a priest since I don't have a confessor? Also follow Father Santa's 10 Commandments? Okay, all right. Would you follow your spiritual director who is a priest since you don't have a confessor? Well, yes, for sure. If that's all you have is a spiritual director who's a priest, but you don't have a confessor, yes. But if he's a priest, he should be your confessor, unless he's like remote and he's not available nearby or something like that. Sure. Yeah. You can use your spiritual director like remotely or something like that. Mm-hmm. I also found Father Thomas Santa to be heaven sent when it comes to helping with scrupulosity. So yeah, I think the 10 Commandments is good there. Cake or pie? Neither. But if I had to choose, cake. My director lives over an hour away. Right. But you might be able to see your director once a month for confession. But if you can't, yes, sure, you could still meet with them virtually and just listen to what they say. Do you agree that we worship the one true merciful God as Muslims? I think it's actually phrased the opposite. Together with us, they adore the one true God is the way it's phrased. Yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that, in the sense that a Jew worships the one true God. Though I would say a Jew is closer to the worship of the one true God than a Muslim is, but do they understand the one true God in the fullest expression of the one true God? No, because they're not Trinitarians. So they don't fully understand God, but they're oriented towards him. It's, again, as use Taylor Marshall's old analogy, which I'm sure he doesn't use anymore. But the way I understand it, using his analogy, is you have a bow and arrow. It's aimed at the target, but when you shoot the arrow, it doesn't reach the target. That's Jews and Muslims. It's in the right direction, but it doesn't reach the mark, whereas worship of the Trinity does. So, Are theistic evolutionists too liberal for the show? No, I mean, I'm open to theistic evolution. I don't have any dogmas here when it comes to this topic, but I'm open to it. If you're scrupulous, follow Taylor Marshall. Just kidding. Yeah, that's probably the last person you would want to follow if you're scrupulous. Anyone who's a radical traditionalist, that will just aggravate the scrupulosity way more. When was versus populum officially put into the liturgy? I mean, of course, you have this in the post-conciliar era. I think that the germ would be the first occasion where we see it officially, the germ. So what year was the germ released? I forget. The general instruction on the Roman Missal, the germ. Google the year on that one. Was it 69 at the same year of the promulgation of the liturgy itself? Is that when the germ was issued? And then was it in the first edition? I'd have to go back and look, but it's going to be in the germ to my knowledge. But it's put in there as an option. It's not put in there as mandatory. To this day, versus populum is not mandatory. What's your thoughts on people that state there isn't enough evidence for the papacy in the patristic era? I think Jerry Walls talks about this. I would say, I would kindly and most charitably have to say they are not aware of the data in the first millennium for the papacy. They're not aware of all the data. There was a point in time where I would have said the same thing until I encountered an avalanche of more data testifying to the papacy in the Catholic perspective. I grant that you don't normally encounter this kind of stuff in popular apologetic circles, which is why people have that impression. But when you start getting into the primary sources and some of the secondary sources from the scholars, okay, there's a whole lot more than you see in popular online apologetic circles. Way more. I mean, an avalanche more. It's like a fire hydrant. It's just an incredible, outrageous amount of attestation that, some of that attestation may not be distinguished between maybe our perspective and the Orthodox. Some of it is, but some of it is compatible with maybe an Orthodox high Petrine understanding, which is not very common today. But that's miles different from a Protestant, right? Light years away from a Protestant. Okay. Let's see. Will you make a video responding to the points Gavin Orland made to the points you and Swan made on his post? Maybe. I mean, I thought I responded in the comment section adequately, but yeah, maybe do a video on it. Anderson Smith, do you prefer Chesterton or Belloc and why? Neither. I don't really read either one. Why? Never piqued my interest. Not knocking them and not knocking anybody who likes them. Just saying I've never really been, and I have read a little bit from both, but never really grabbed my attention when I read them. Pray for me as I pray my comprehensive exam. Absolutely. Everyone pray for Bo there. What is this? Are you mostly done with live streams? I'm not sure what you mean. Favorite apparition of Our Lady? Probably Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's pretty impressive. And it seems to have converted, 8 million people from what I've been told? I see how the Pope can suspend any tradition that isn't a divine tradition. But how can he suspend a rite? What does it mean to suspend a way of life? Wow. I mean, I don't have a whole hour to answer this one. So I won't be able to do so adequately. But you're right to note that he can't suspend divine tradition. How can he suspend a rite? I think you probably mean discontinue a rite, but I think that you can maybe use the term suspend a rite. How? Because a rite is not synonymous with sacred tradition. That's how. A rite contains aspects of sacred tradition. Yeah, but is sacred tradition only found in that one rite that is being discontinued? Is that really what we're going to argue? Surely the transmission of sacred tradition is in a broader sense than just in one liturgical rite. Sacred tradition is in all liturgical rites. And I don't think that one liturgical rite preserves an aspect of sacred tradition that none of the other liturgical rites preserve. I don't believe that. I think that all of the liturgical rites preserve all of sacred tradition, not just parts of it. Therefore, if you suspend or discontinue one, which I'm not saying is the most prudent judgment, but if he does it, that's not the same as eliminating a component of sacred tradition, even though liturgy carries sacred tradition, because that same sacred tradition is going to be found in all the other liturgical rites that still exist and still are promulgated, so or approved. So I think it assumes the idea that this liturgical rite that's being suspended or discontinued has some aspect of sacred tradition that is nowhere else. What? Why? Really? Name one aspect of sacred tradition that is in one liturgical rite and is not found in any others. I'd love to know, because that means all these other liturgical rites are deficient. And that's most certainly not the case of the Catholic Church, that reveres all of the liturgical rites equally. Pius V suspended a few rites. People often forget that. Yes, he did. And we're not just talking about, it seems like it's more than just the ones that are 200 years old from what I've read. I've checked out the ESV CE from Augustine Institute. I've heard great things about it, but I have not checked it out yet. I would love to soon, though. All right. Would I have Dr. Mazza on the show? Sure. I don't agree at all with his view, but yeah, we could have a charitable discussion. I think so. Last one. Can I briefly define capital T tradition versus small t tradition? Yes, I've done a whole video on the different senses of tradition, about 11 of them. But as far as the distinction between just capital T and small t, sacred tradition, capital T, is going to be that which has been handed down by from God, divinely revealed from God, handed down to us through the apostles. So it's not just handed down from the apostles. That's just apostolic tradition, but that could be a human apostolic tradition. Divine apostolic tradition, which is going to be the capital T, is going to be God has revealed it and has been handed down through the apostles. There have been some traditions that have not been divinely revealed, but are apostolic tradition, and we would categorize those in small t. We would also categorize ecclesial traditions that come much later after the apostles from the church, also as small t. So that's a quick answer. Okay. Is Gregory Palamas a saint in the church? He's in several Eastern Catholic liturgical calendars, so I would say yes, he is. I don't think that the church could allow into its liturgical calendar in any of its churches somebody who's in hell. That doesn't mean that everything he said is right or good, but it does mean that he's a saint, that he's in heaven. How does that comport with some of the things that he said that seem to go against Catholicism? Same way that you see other saints saying things that don't go with what we believe today. Palamas was misunderstood the Catholic Church. So what he was refuting wasn't actually Catholicism, wasn't actually the Catholic Church, wasn't actually really the papacy. It was a misunderstanding. So I don't think that he intentionally denied anything that he believed God has revealed or instituted. All right. Well, I appreciate all the questions here. Wonderful, wonderful questions. And y'all made me work for them today. I'm telling you. Good stuff. I appreciate it. I'll have to turn some of these into highlight clips. Really, really good questions. Thank y'all so much. We'll have to do more of these. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Check me out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology, or hit the join button here on YouTube and become a channel member. Either way, Patreon or YouTube, you're going to get access to extra content. And one of those is extra videos that I post on there for patrons and members only, which I've just posted some extra stuff earlier. in the last few days, and I'm probably going to do some more later on tonight for patrons. So y'all make sure to check that out. All right, that is going to do it all. I really appreciate your prayers. Continue to pray for me. And again, if you would like to consider supporting me, I would hope that you definitely consider. All right, we'll see you later. God bless. Hey, RNT fans, if you're looking to buy a home or sell a home and would like a realtor who shares your beliefs, be sure to check out our sponsor, realestateforlife.org, and be sure to tell them